The pageantry, the clothes, at least most of us, the food, perhaps friends or family, the gathering on Easter means a lot, but the reason we gather is the miracle of this day when God decided to invade human history, to suffer and die for us, and to rise again on the third day and reign to lead all of the world into the grand peace, the great shalom of his kingdom. And we celebrate that today. C.S. Lewis writes this about Easter. Jesus is forced to open a door that has been locked since the death of the first man. He has met, fought, and beaten the king of death. Everything is different because he has done so. This is the beginning of the new creation. A new chapter in cosmic history has opened. And so we gather together to read the story out of the book of John. In every single one of the Gospels, we read about various different takes on what took place that Easter Sunday morning. And so we're going to read from John. If you have a pew Bible and like to follow along, it's on page 1685, John chapter 20, if you'd simply like to listen and receive the word of the Lord, and especially because we've already stood so much, but also in order to give you the opportunity to experience Easter and to hear the word of the Lord in a way that best allows you to hear. Then if that's standing up, I invite you to stand, and if that's sitting down and being quiet at your seat, you are free to do that. So however you receive the word of the Lord, let's turn to John chapter 20. If you'd like to stand, in other words, you may. Early on that first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running. But the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and he believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Now, Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They've taken away my Lord," she said, "and I don't know where they put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I'll go get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Don't keep holding on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. Let's skip down to verse 24. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus the twin, one of the 12, was not with the disciples that night when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord." But he said to them, lest I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. Thank you. Easter through the eyes of two people. Two individuals that had the experience of knowing Jesus, of walking with Jesus, of loving Jesus, of seeing him sleep and eat and wake up in the morning and go to bed at night. Two people. First, Mary, we call her Mary Magdalene. Perhaps she's from a town called Magdala. We really don't know a lot about her. There are a lot of Marys at that time in history. Do we have any Marys here? Let's see if we got a couple of Marys. There's a Mary right there. You'll love this, by the way. This will be fun. And there's some shy Marys, I realize. You know. Any Thomases here? There's a Thomas. Wait, you're into. You'll be all over this. It'll be just great. Mary and Thomas, two ordinary people that happen to know, love, trust, follow Jesus on that first Sunday. But we go to Sunday so quickly. We go to Easter morning. Can we imagine what it was like? Mary, a follower of Jesus. There were the 12 disciples, and then there were other men and women, disciples, followers of Jesus Christ. And they traveled with him. Sometimes it was just the 12, at least that's what's recorded, but often it was a lot more people, and it was men and women. Mary was one of those women that would travel with Jesus and with the other disciples. All we know about her is in Luke 8, we read that she had some demons cast out of her, and evidently from that day forward, she traveled with the disciples. She became one of their little family. And so Mary had been around him quite a bit. When the day came and we went through what we call Passion Week, leading up to the arrest of Jesus, and then the horror of leading him to the crucifixion, Mary and a few of the other women, including Jesus' mother, Mary, they followed closely. They saw everything. The men, at least almost all of them, scattered out of fear, but the women stayed close, evidently. And they watched as our Lord dragged the cross, as he was beaten, as he was hung on that cross that day, as the sky went dark, and he cried out, "It is finished!" And his last breath left his lungs, his head hung. Mary Magdalene was there, watching all her hopes, her dreams completely dashed. She had given everything to follow him. She had loved him. She had known him. We don't know the exact nature of the relationship, but we do know that there was a special bond between them, as there was with each of those who were his intimate companions. Imagine what it felt like for Mary on that Friday. And then as he dies, they take his body down, and they were going to lay him in a new tomb, and the women were present. They followed with the supplies to prepare his body for burial. And so as they brought him into the tomb, Mary was certainly among those who helped wrap his body in the linens with the cloth. They could not yet prepare the body. It was getting dark, getting ready for the High Holy Day, and so they had to leave. The Roman soldiers moved a stone in place so that no one would steal the body, and the soldiers guarded in front of that stone. And Mary left that place that Friday night. Can you imagine what it felt like? And she wakes up Saturday morning and goes through every hour participating in the high holy day, but still a total sense of not only grieving a lost friend, but a lost Lord, one that she had devoted her entire life to following, and he was now gone, his body in a tomb. And yet, because of their religious obligations, they were together on that Saturday in their grief through Friday night and Saturday night. That's what Mary was experiencing. Walter Brueggemann, Old Testament professor, is a brilliant writer, says this: Saturday is that in-between day of stillness and doubt and despair, when time stands still in lethal flatness. Perhaps you're in a Saturday right now, but we've all known Saturdays. And so before it was even light, we read in John 20, verse 1, early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and brought the spices to prepare the body to give Jesus at least the decency of the Jewish ritual of burial. And when she arrives, not only is the stone rolled away, but she sneaks in and looks, and the body is gone. Can you imagine what Mary was going through? Completely distraught. She's falling apart as she looks and wonders in despair and sadness. And then the angels show up. And the angels declare that he's risen. In John, what we read is before the angels appeared, Mary runs back to the two disciples in her grief, and she says, they've taken him, we don't know where. So Peter and John they run in, and they talk, and then they leave, and evidently Mary is alone and peeks in again, and then those angels are there, and they sit at the head and the feet of where the body laid, and they ask this rather odd question. Did that cross your mind when we read the scripture? Here she is from Friday watching his suffering to his death, to laid in the tomb, to waiting around Friday and Saturday, to arriving, and he's gone. And the angels say, "Why, woman, are you crying?" And in her grief, she doesn't even respond, but she hears something behind her, and she turns around, and there's one standing there, and he says to her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?" She doesn't recognize that it's Jesus. In her grief, in her pain. And then Jesus simply says this, "Mary, Mary." He doesn't need to say anything else. What's in a name? When he said her name, her deep despair broke through to blinding ecstasy. That all of a sudden Mary knew that Jesus actually had risen from the dead. He was not gone. He was alive. He was here. So she grabs him. I know in the text it says, "Don't hold me," but he's saying, "Don't continue to hold me. I have work to do. So do you, Mary. Go tell the brothers." And that's Mary's story, simply because he said her name. Dale Carnegie says this: a person's name is to him or her the sweetest and most important sound in any language. Your name, the sweetest and most important sound in any language. There's layers to our names. We all know this if we would but think about it a little bit. There's the name that we spend a lifetime building. There's the name of our reputation, of our accomplishments. There's the name that people will use to notice us, to affirm our presence. And that's one level that we spend our whole life propping up to make certain that eventually, somehow, someone will notice. But we all know there's a deeper name that we carry. The resurrection is when the love of God becomes personal and intimate. Mary. My day job, I'm one of the preaching pastors here. I get to be here for a season, and I've just loved this so much. But my day job is I'm a researcher and a professor at Fuller Seminary. And in doing that, I spend a lot of time trying to understand young people, emerging adults, for women mid to late 20s, men mid to late 50s. And I spent a few years ago, on a high school campus trying to do some research and understanding what goes on in the mind and psyche and experience of high school students. So I was there as a substitute teacher listening to stories, and I'm in the teacher's lounge one day, about 4 weeks into the new semester. So I'm asking the teachers, do you have any stories of kids? I'm trying to get a feel for what's going on here. And one man said, yeah, I had something happen to me just yesterday. I had this student in my class, and she's rather shy. In fact, she doesn't say anything. And so I've had her for 3 or 4 weeks since the new semester, but I haven't gotten her to say anything at all. And then yesterday, I'm walking by her on the way to lunch, and I simply said, "Hi, Sarah," and walked on to lunch. And then he pulls out of his pocket this note, and he had obviously opened it several times and shared with people as a precious possession that he was really surprised by. He read me the note. "Mr. Devlin, thank you for knowing my name. I'm kind of new here, and nobody knows my name. But you do. See you in class. Your friend, Sarah." And he just looked at me, realizing the power of a name. Sarah. Jesus knows your name. Mary. Jesus knows your name. Then there's Thomas. And we go to Thomas as that night Jesus appeared to his disciples as they're fearful with locked doors, and Jesus appears and they're all excited. And Thomas was somehow not with them then, so Thomas comes back and they tell Thomas, "We've seen the Lord." And you know what Thomas says. You know Thomas says, "Unless I see the nail marks myself, I'll never believe." So he gets this name. Well, what's the name Thomas gets? Come on. Yeah, you all know it. It's horrible. 2,000 years, Doubting Thomas. It's on his business card in heaven. What are you doing? I'm that guy. Yeah, here you go. Doubting Thomas. What a horrible name to go, "Oh yeah, there he is. There's the guy." Other disciples, they have chariots, you know. He's got kind of a motorized skateboard, not much. And yet Thomas is the one, just a few chapters earlier in John, where they're up in the north and Jesus said, "It's time for us to go. It's time for me to meet my fate. We have to go down to Jerusalem." And all the disciples try to talk Jesus out of it. Thomas is the one that says, "Come on, we've cast our lot with him. We're going too." Thomas is the hero. Thomas loved Jesus. Thomas cared deeply. He gets this bad rap because of this one instance, but it was out of a sincere desire to know for himself because he loved Jesus so deeply, and he was in grief. He was in Saturday. Mary had it Friday, Saturday, till daybreak Sunday. Thomas had it for a week. Can you imagine? And then Jesus arrives. The doors are locked. Jesus comes, and he looks right at Thomas. And he says, "Hey, see? Come, it's okay. Come here. Here are my hands. Here's my side. That's where they pierced me with a spear. Thomas, come on. Thomas, I know your story. I know your fear. I know your sadness. I know your Saturday. That hope is gone. And you so desperately want to know that I'm alive, but you want to see for yourself. Here, see for yourself. Thomas, come. You belong to me." And Thomas does not grab onto Jesus. Thomas doesn't put his hand in his side. Thomas falls at the feet of Jesus and said these 5 words, "My Lord and my God." Jesus does not need any more votes to be Lord and God. Thomas was affirming that in the risen Christ, who knew his story, who invited him to friendship, who had come to break the bonds of pain and death and sorrow and to lift him high. Thomas, I know you. Come. Thomas said, you are my Lord and you are my God, and I will follow you for the rest of my days. 2 stories filled with sorrow and brought to great hope and joy. The resurrection of Jesus is where God proves that he knows your name and he knows your story. And he has risen to take all of us with him on this grand adventure of trusting him as he brings wholeness and healing to the world. Perhaps some of us, maybe many of us are here, even as we sing, even as we celebrate Easter, as we go through the ritual and the pageantry, that our life's kind of filled with Saturday. That there's more darkness and despair than lightness and hope. But the love of God has broken through and it's become personal and intimate, not just for Mary and Thomas, and not just for Chap, or James, or Elizabeth, but for each of us here. He knows your name. He knows your story. Jan Richardson, great writer, she writes these thoughtful, contemplative, more like poem reflections. Perhaps in one of her poems about that Saturday stillness leading to Sunday morning, you may hear the voice of God over your shoulder, calling your name. Jan Richardson writes, let it be. We will still ourselves enough to hear what may come to echo, as if in the breath another breathing, as if in the heartbeat another heart. Let it be, we will not try to fathom what comes to meet us in the stillness, but simply open to the approach of a mystery we hardly dared to dream. Easter, where the love of God says your name. May today change everything for each one of us, because he is risen.